Conversations, episode LeBron. First-time listeners, hopefully that is not too difficult to understand. And long-time listeners, if you come to me and say you were confused by that, I am disappointed in you. I am your host, Kay Bex, and whether you are a first-timer or a long-timer, thank you for coming in and listening to the show. If you are new or just haven't done so yet, please follow us on socials. Give us some love on the platforms that you stream on. We are on Facebook, X, at KBEX_ATC, Instagram, at cornversationspod, and if you'd like to send us a mailbag question, cornversationspod@gmail.com, or you can send us one of those comments on any of those listening platforms or socials. I mentioned this last week, I believe, or last episode, that we are amping up our ability to be on all of the major streaming platforms, and at this point I can say that with even more confidence. If you are somebody who likes to listen to podcasts on Amazon Music/Audible or TuneIn Radio, we are now on those platforms as well. So in addition to the heavy hitters, those ones are on the list, and you can listen to Conversations as well on those platforms. We've got a packed show here this episode. We're going to hit a lot of different topics, but it is March now, so we are into the greatest time of the year. That is, of course, on the precipice of March Madness, which is the single greatest sporting event that exists on this planet. We're going to go ahead and talk some round ball as a result of what is to come here over the next few weeks. Then we will shift to a mailbag question for the first time in a while. So thank you to that listener who will be named later for sending in that question. We'll go ahead and hit that today. And then we'll try something a little bit new. I've got a segment that I want to try out, and I want to get your feedback on that. So listeners, at the end, I'll give you a heads up when that's coming, but would love to hear your feedback on the new segment. If it's something that is received well, we might see that become a regular staple of Conversations episodes moving forward. But without further ado, to the round ball. As I mentioned, we are in March now, and March Madness is just a couple of weeks away, but really the madness has already started. We have entered conference tournament portion of the schedule. So some of the small conferences have, in fact, kicked off their conference tournaments already. And something that I want to touch upon when it comes to conference tournaments is a novel idea that at least a couple that I'm aware of have implemented, which I think is a really smart idea when you consider the fact that many of these conferences, the small and mid-majors, are going to be single bid leagues. And the only team that's going to get into the NCAA tournament is the team that wins those conference tournaments. And what I've always found to be a little bit disappointing for the teams in those conferences that have spent all year at the very top of those leagues is that they still have to prove it in a win-or-go-home scenario, which is a really pressure-packed situation for those schools. And unlike some of their major brethren, if they slip up or they get caught with what normally happens in March all over the place, which is those buzzer beaters or those upsets, then some really good teams in some conferences that don't get multiple bids are going to be left going home packing or ending up in the NIT, which is obviously not where they want to be. And frankly speaking, for the viewer that doesn't get a chance to watch these teams all year and wants to see the best competition possible enter the actual NCAA tournament, it's a little bit of a disappointment for them as well. And what a couple of conferences have done, at least within the last couple of years, it may be longer than that, but I've noticed it over the last couple of years with these two conferences in particular, is that they have shifted to a really novel idea. At least I think it's novel because I'm aware only of these two conferences that do it, but setting up the conference tournament to give a major advantage to the top teams from the regular season portion. And it started with, in my opinion, it started with the West Coast Conference because you've always had the top two seeds in that conference tournament get a bye all the way to the semifinal rounds, but what the Sun Belt did was take it to the nth degree and created what I'll call the Flying V bracket, which if you were to pull up the Sun Belt Conference Tournament bracket, you would know immediately what I mean by this, because what you have in that conference is a scenario where each round essentially introduces two new teams. And what that has done is create this kind of unusual looking 7-round bonanza that exists over the course of this conference tournament, where the worst teams would have to put together 7 straight victories in order to qualify and nab that automatic bid from the Sun Belt Conference. And I think this is great because what it does, in addition to bringing some relevancy or at least some, some attention to the Sun Belt Conference, which a lot of people wouldn't pay attention to otherwise, is that it gives those top 2 seeds the opportunity to just wait, bide their time, and be fresh when they get to face these teams who really didn't earn it throughout the regular season. And I think that that's great for college basketball, especially for these small and mid-major conferences that only get that one bid, to have the advantage be so heavily skewed towards the teams who have done well throughout the regular season and who have earned it. I used to talk to somebody that I worked with, and he would argue with me that March Madness is not the greatest tournament or greatest sporting event on the planet because you're not actually getting to crown the best team in the sport. And he had a point. It's often not the best team in the sport that gets crowned. It's the team that is the hottest, the team that's playing the best. But this aspect kind of takes that out of the equation a little bit when it comes to giving deserving teams an opportunity to experience the NCAA tournament. So as opposed to having an 8 or 9 seed from the Sun Belt happen to make their way through 4 games of maybe some luck in early March, now those 8 or 9 seeds are going to have to win 5 games to get there. And the top 2 seeds, which happen to be Troy and Marshall in this year's tournament, only have to play 2 games in order, they only have to play 2 games, and the winner of that second game would be the champion from that conference. So I really think that that's a great thing for these small conferences. I'm kind of surprised that leagues that are in this position where they are typically one-bid leagues haven't all adopted this, because most could. When you consider some smaller leagues that only have 8 or so teams, even those, you would have a way to do this. And I think that as time goes on and there's more attention brought to these 2 tournaments, the West Coast Conference and the Sun Belt, and how they're doing it, there's probably going to be some serious consideration from other conferences as well. So shout out to those 2 conferences. I think what they're doing is great, and best of luck to those top teams, because ultimately, while we love to see underdogs and Cinderellas, when you consider these conferences, everybody is kind of an underdog and a Cinderella, and you really want the best teams from those conferences representing the leagues when they get into the NCAA tournament, where truly all eyeballs are on the smaller seeds and smaller teams. Staying with the mid-major topic, we have to talk about Miami of Ohio, because this is a team that has really become kind of controversial over the past weeks as they have worked their way through the regular season and have found themselves as the only remaining unbeaten in college basketball this season. And normally, when you're talking about an unbeaten, you would be talking about what they could do in the NCAA tournament and whether they are true national title contenders. But it is so far from the truth for Miami. We're not having that conversation at all, and for good reason. But the conversation we are having, and maybe not for such a good reason, is should Miami even be in the tournament at all if they don't manage to win the MAC tournament? The MAC is typically a one-bid league, and you could argue from a metrics perspective that Miami of Ohio isn't even the best team in the MAC this season. In fact, from a metrics perspective, that title would actually go to the Akron Zips. But Miami is 30-0. They have been the only unbeaten team in college basketball for a couple of weeks now. And if they're able to beat the Ohio Bobcats tomorrow night, Friday night, then they will have finished the regular season unbeaten and be going into the MAC tournament not only as the number 1 seed, but as a team with a 31-0 record. And what's so curious about Miami's case here is that a 31-0 team, in my opinion, should have no question on whether or not they're going to be participating in the NCAA tournament. Even a 30-1 team who doesn't win the MAC tournament should not have any question about whether or not they're playing in the NCAA tournament. We're talking about a 68-team tournament at this point. We're talking about a situation that has only occurred in the last 25 years, 3 other times to date. You'd have to go back to a Kentucky team in the early 2010s, the Wichita State team that everybody remembers from that same time period, and a Gonzaga team from the late 2020s that almost got the job done and won the national title after going undefeated in the regular season. Miami is only the 4th potential team that may come into March Madness with an unblemished record. And in the case of those 3 teams previous, we weren't talking about whether or not they were going to make the tournament, but again, talking about whether or not those teams had the ability to win the national title, to cut down the nets. And because of Miami's situation, the strength of schedule that ranks outside of the top 300, the metrics that everybody is so focused on in today's college basketball game that see Miami of Ohio with 0 quad 1 wins this season and a net ranking that would put them outside of the NCAA tournament if you only considered net ranking and seeded teams accordingly, has talking heads like Bruce Pearl talking about how they should not get in over teams like Auburn, which consequently is the team that Pearl coached as of last season and whose son coaches the team now, who currently sits right around 500, who have had a multitude of opportunities playing in the SEC to capture quad 1 wins left and right, to capture road victories left and right, and have not been able to capitalize on those things. Whereas Miami of Ohio is playing the schedule that is in front of it. It has taken on all comers and come away victorious and has those road victories, which in many cases are a better indication of where a team lies in terms of their true strength and their true ability to compete when you get into March, as compared with your quad rankings, as compared with where you sit in the net rankings. And I have to apologize to Miami at this point because a few weeks ago I did a segment and Miami was featured on a fraud or for real list, and I noted Miami as a fraud at the time. And one of the reasons that I did so is because of the same reasons that I'm saying are not applicable to this team at this point, which is strength of schedule, quad 1 wins, and net ranking. And at this point, you have to throw all of those things out the window. We have 68 teams in the tournament, and we're talking about expanding so that we don't have these types of discussions. But frankly speaking, we don't need to have these types of discussions when you're talking about a team who has racked up 30-plus wins and who is a single win away from running the table during the regular season. If this was so easy, then we would not have had only 3 teams in the last 25 years prior to this season that would have accomplished that. And so Miami should not be on the bubble, in my opinion. They should be a team that is, oddly speaking, a lock for a 10 to 12 seed. At least that's how I see them ideally. They're not a 1 seed, they're not a 2 seed, but they are absolutely a tournament team. So at this point, I almost hope that the MAC becomes a 2-bid league. I'd love to see a situation where Miami gets to the title game and slips up, maybe against a better Akron team when you consider on paper, and makes the committee prove me right that they're going to do the right thing here and reward a team who has been so good all season, who has been lucky enough because there have been a lot of overtime games on Miami's schedule. There have been a lot of close calls, but they got through them, and there should be something to be said for that. Focusing on college basketball as a whole, because you've probably noticed my voice is pretty excited here, and I am. I'm a huge college basketball fan, and I've been watching even through some of what maybe some people would call down years. But I'm excited to assert that college basketball is in a really good place right now. And one of the reasons that it's in a really good place right now is NIL. We talk about how NIL has done some negative things, especially when you consider football, and how perhaps the lack of guardrails when it comes to NIL and some of the things with the transfer portal are going to potentially put college football at risk when it comes to its place in American sports fandom. But with college basketball, I actually see it being the opposite, because what NIL really does is it levels the playing field when it comes to college basketball when you compare it to its competition, which college football really doesn't have. And that competition, of course, is the alternate options that kids coming out of high school have when they consider what they want to do in between being a high school player and having the opportunity to play in the NBA. And when NIL didn't exist and the budgets weren't there for these college programs to offer a competitive pay scale when it came to the single year that a lot of these marquee players, a lot of these future lottery picks are going to be considering, things like overseas leagues and the G League were really outshining college basketball, because as much as everybody would like to believe this is the case, kids are not going to school for a year or two because they simply love the university and want to play in the NCAA tournament. That's an idealistic state. It doesn't exist. It's about the money. And in this case, college basketball's case, it's a good thing that it's about the money, because now that the money is there, kids are coming back to college because the playing field has been leveled. And now that the playing field has been leveled from a financial standpoint, you can make the argument that playing in front of large crowds in March instead of playing in front of half-empty arenas in the G League or in overseas leagues is a benefit to playing in college. And you're hearing it for some of these players, actually, that they're even considering staying in college longer. Why? Because the prospect of the NBA doesn't always mean an increase in funds for these guys. And so why not stay and play an extra year in college? Nobody's ever going to say, yeah, I want to play an extra year overseas in Europe, or yeah, I definitely want to play an extra year in the G League. But when you're sitting there at Duke and you're having a lot of fun in college and you're getting to play with guys that you're having fun with, and there's lots of fans, and you're getting lots of marketing opportunities and building your brand, playing in front of fans and a fan base that will eat that up as opposed to those other options, then yes, absolutely, it's an option that you would consider. And the game of college basketball has, over the past couple of years, made major strides as a result of that. You're seeing it with regards to the number of teams that are playing at an elite level this year, the number of teams that have a legitimate shot at winning the national title, and frankly speaking, the number of teams who are benefiting from the transfer portal, because there is an ability for other schools to pay these guys when they have the ability to bring some additional revenue for whomever is paying them through NIL. And so I think this is great. I have gone on record in previous episodes saying I don't even mind the fact that some of these guys have been playing overseas or been in the G League and have come back to play in college. Some look at that as a crumbling of the system and how it needs to be fixed. I look at it as a situation where college basketball has just become the premier stop for elite players on their way to the true professional level that everybody wants to get to, which is the NBA. So let me know your thoughts on those three things in college basketball. We are definitely going to be covering the sport here regularly over the next few episodes, next few weeks as we get into March Madness, and I'm really excited for it. So again, that mailbag is cornversationspod@gmail.com. Send us your questions as we get nearer the tournament. I'd love to hear your thoughts and what you guys want to hear on the show moving forward. I think that's a perfect transition as well, because we are going to get to the mailbag question that was submitted to us, and it's a little bit of a transition to a different topic because we're not going to focus on college basketball here. This question comes from Trent. He says, K-Bex, longtime listener, multiple-time mailbag sender. I know most people think it's still the off-season for golf, but the PGA Tour is in full swing, pun intended. World number one golfer Scottie Scheffler has in multiple tournaments already this year started his first round near the bottom of the field. But then he becomes the Scottie we all know and love the next three rounds and ends up in the top 10 to 12 positions. To be fair to him, he did win his 20th PGA tournament earlier this year. What do you think is going on with him during the first round? Curious to know your thoughts. Well, thanks for the question, Trent. I think it's a good one. If you're a golf fan or even a casual fan of the game, you probably have wondered this yourself, which is, how do these golfers react to having a bad first round? And is it truly damaging to their ability to win a tournament if they have a round where they find themselves several strokes behind the leaders? And definitely it has something to do with who the player is. And I think my answer is going to kind of parallel that. But what I'll say about individual sports versus team sports is that with the individual sports, and I'm thinking things like golf, tennis, etc., is that the mental side is so important to maintaining your composure that I do think that you have a better opportunity in individual sports to recover from poor early performance than you do in a team sport. And here's my logic behind that, is that Scottie Scheffler, being the number one golfer in the world right now, and being a guy who has come back from poor rounds in the past and has been able to put himself in position to win later on in tournaments, understands that everything comes down to him. In team sports, when you get off to bad starts, not only could it be an indication, if it's happening throughout the year, that there might be an underlying issue with how the team is constructed, you're relying on more than one individual, more than one mental makeup when having to try to recover from that situation. In Scottie's case, Scottie needs to rely on Scottie, and Scottie needs to understand and believe in what Scottie can do in order to make himself viable as the rest of the tournament goes on. And I think that's ultimately what you've been seeing, Trent, in the case of early this year, is that while he may get off to a start that might not be as blazing as some of the other golfers, he does trust in his ability, and the confidence right now is at an all-time high, and for good reason. And I think the other thing with Scottie Scheffler that you have to consider is this is a player that early in his career did struggle with the mental side of things. And one of the things that he credits to being as rock solid as he is now is his ability to get over that mental hump. So he is in total control of his mental makeup, and I think he's one of the strongest mental players on the tour right now and has been for some time. And when you consider that coupled with the fact that any player who is ahead of him who might have an early lead, when they see that he's made the cut, there is no choice from other golfers on the tour to do anything but periodically look in the rearview mirror to see where Scottie is. And when Scottie starts poorly in round one, but then slowly but surely makes his way up through the leaderboard, and you start to see his name on that board, which those golfers can see in the major tournaments, it is an advantage, frankly, for a guy like Scottie Scheffler who has all that confidence, who knows he can do it, who is totally in control of the performance to make his way back. So I don't see a bad round by Scottie Scheffler, round one, being something that is going to damage him, even when you consider the big tournaments. In fact, in the big tournaments, I would argue that a lot of times there is a smaller gap between where guys are at somewhere around the cusp of the cut and the leaderboard. So it's even more advantageous for him if he were to get a bad start in something like the U.S. Open, for example, where he only may have to make up a few strokes over the course of those next 3 rounds. So thanks for that question again, Trent. Mailbag questions are my favorite portion of the show. If I don't have a guest and I'm flying solo here, having those mailbag questions certainly makes the show go a lot more smoothly, in my opinion. And, of course, we're covering what you guys want to hear. So now we're on to the final segment of the show, and I teased it earlier. I said we're going to try something new here. I want to try a version of rapid fire. A lot of shows have this, a lot of radio shows, of course, and I think that it's something that allows us to maybe hit on the topics of the day, if you will, without getting too in-depth and too overburdened with details on them. So if you comment on anything this week other than a mailbag question, this is where I want you to comment. Let me know what you think of the rapid fire segment and if you guys like this. And if you do, maybe we'll incorporate this into the show on a more regular basis. So rapid fire topic number 1. I have felt like I've been beating this like a dead horse in prior episodes, but I'm going to do it one more time. We're going to talk Olympics, IOC, and IPC. And there is a slight difference between the IPC, which is the International Paralympic Committee, and the IOC, which is the International Olympic Committee. However, they do share a long-term partnership. The IOC provides significant support to the IPC, including financial stability and, perhaps more importantly, marketing rights. So perception has a play into how they structure their partnership as well. And what I want to touch on here is the continued hypocrisy of, we'll just call it the Olympic Committee, when it comes to their decision-making on things like perception ideals such as banning flags from being flown during the Olympics and banning athletes from participating under those flags. The IPC announced that they would allow Russian and Belarusian athletes to participate under their flag for the upcoming Paralympic Games. And for those that are not aware, the Paralympics start on March 6th and they go through March 15th. So if you're somebody who is a little sad about the ending of the Olympics, technically they're not over yet. What I find hypocritical about this is, of course, what I discussed in a previous episode, which is that the IOC has been wishy-washy and inconsistent with their decision-making in terms of what they're doing with regards to political topics. While the IOC did not allow Russian and Belarusian athletes to participate, it apparently is okay for the IPC, who is closely aligned with the IOC, to allow their athletes in the same year to participate in the Paralympics. At some point, somebody needs to call out the IOC and the IPC for this. I don't understand why there is so much agreement that this is okay. If you're going to allow the athletes to participate, allow them to participate. If you're not going to allow the athletes to participate, don't allow them to participate. But don't have one series of games allow it and another series of games not allow it. We're not going to be able to overlook the fact that perhaps more people are watching the Olympics and fewer people are watching the Paralympics. It's 2026. This news is going to get out anyway, and it is hypocrisy to the nth degree that the Olympic Committee would allow this. I just don't understand it. Moving to baseball. World Baseball Classic starts today, actually, so we have started. Is the WBC a major marquee event in the United States? Well, is it a major event? I don't want to. I'm going to bury the lead a little bit there. In my opinion, the answer is it depends on where you're watching. In countries like Japan, Dominican Republic, Cuba, Mexico, I would argue that yes, The WBC is as important as events such as the Winter Olympic Hockey Tournament or potentially March Madness. But in the United States, I think it lags behind those types of events, and here's why. When you consider what else is going on in the country, when you consider where baseball is right now, I don't think that the fans have fully bought into this. Diehards, yes, they're going to relish the opportunity to watch a tournament where players are playing with the flag on their chest, and it's a diversion from the relatively bland, complex, and not all that important games that ensue when you consider spring training. But when you consider everything else that's going on, I just think that the World Baseball Classic still has a ways to go when it comes to really attracting the country's attention in the United States. It's not a knock on the WBC. I think they've done a good job. They end the tournament right around the same time that March Madness starts. So in theory, there is the opportunity to focus on both. But the perception from my perspective is that while it is a good tournament and they've set it up well, it still is being seen as kind of a sideshow before the Major League Baseball season starts. How do they fix it? I really don't know if I have an answer. I'm not sure if there is a fix. I just don't know if the World Baseball Classic is ever really going to become a major international tournament when you consider the perception from viewers in the United States. And lastly, and much to my amusement, it seems that in the Premier League, Tottenham is truly in a relegation battle at this point. It's hard to believe that we are talking about a Big Six team in the Premier League that might actually have a realistic shot of getting sent down to the championship next season. But here we are with 9 games remaining. Tottenham sits just a point ahead of West Ham, who is currently in the relegation position. I'm not really sure where it's gone wrong for Tottenham. You could probably look at a number of different aspects of their program and what they've done this season to paint a picture as to why they've gotten there. But whereas just a few games ago, we probably would have said, there's no chance that this team is going to have any shot of really being relegated into a lower division. At this point, you're in one of the situations now where there's too many other factors going on and you are too close to the bottom to not be considered one of those candidates. To try to compare this to something that happens in American sports, and there really is no good comparison because there's no promotion relegation within the Big Four in American sports, this would be like if the Atlanta Braves had a very bad season and were told, sorry, you weren't good enough this season, you're going to play in AAA next year. All of the Braves' amenities, their stadium, their marketing and media rights, all of those things moving down to the AAA level. That's what you would be considering if Tottenham were to go into the championship. It would quite literally be men against boys from a financial perspective. And I'm kind of here to watch this play out. Not to say that I'm going to go on record and hope for anybody to lose, but as an Arsenal supporter, those of you that are Premier League fans probably understand where I sit here. And it's fascinating to watch that one of these clubs with more resources than about 2/3 of the Premier League would be in this position. That's all I've got for this episode. So one more time, plug in the socials. Go ahead and like, subscribe, comment, do all the things that put us in good standing with the algorithms. Very much appreciate the support. And of course, the mailbag, if you'd like to submit a question for a future episode, cornversationspod@gmail.com. Looking forward to some future episodes here. I think we've got some fun things planned with baseball, with March Madness, and some other things in between as well. So enjoy all the sports that are out there. March is a great time of year. Can't wait to continue covering. And until next time, take it easy, Shuckers.